board. I like this board the other day, huh? I had to clear the table off here a little bit. Okay, perfect. All right, let's get started at the 10:25 mark. All right, hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I know I've been giving you a lot of live lessons, but I kind of like them, and I mix it up. Sometimes I like to do the videos at night, release them for you in the morning, and then other days I like to do a live lesson with people that want to log in, and then also I can archive this video, and I can put it on YouTube really easily, and everybody can see it. So, and it's kind of like a natural environment in terms of the classroom. Let's see. Got everybody in. Okay, so people will probably be joining or coming and going as you please, and that's fine. We're going to finish up chapter 30 today. You can find chapter 30 on that link on Google Classroom that I've sent to you. You don't have to, but we have a few people today to go over, really interesting people. And we're going to start with a German artist by the name of Albrecht. Uh-oh, you know what I need is. Oh, baby, what are you doing out here? You go inside. You're going to go back inside? Oh, okay. Albrecht Dürer, and he is German. Okay, and it's important to know where these people are from because we don't have. Let me make sure that I'm putting this in the right spot. Oh, a little bit higher. See, there we go. Okay, so making sure that we know where these people are from because the Renaissance, again, the theme is starting in Italy and then expanding to the rest of Europe. And so Albrecht Dürer, he is going to be a guy, he's an artist, and he is all about the idea of proportion. And if you look onto your chapter 30, you can see the definition of this. Okay, so, sorry. Okay, okay. All right, so proportion, and you can copy this down into your notes right now. Proportion is the relative size of things. When we look back at some of the artwork before the Renaissance, you're going to see that many of them, you can also go back and get these definitions later. Remember, you can pause it. So, but I do want to kind of make this not as long. But the proportion of things or the relative size of objects in the old types of paintings that we saw. I'm teaching, baby. You got to go. Okay, is really weird. You're going to see horses and people the same size. You'll see buildings and people the same size. You'll see people in the background and the foreground the same size. And it really takes some actual mathematics and study and science to create something like that. So what he'll base his whole life on is making sure that things are correctly sized. All right. So when you're a person and a horse, if you look at back again, the person is like the size of a horse. And then if you've ever stood next to a horse, you know that's not the case. And yet in artwork, it wasn't being displayed that way. So Dürer, which is a very accurate symbol of the German philosophy. Germans, for much of history and even into modern times, are very strict with the things. They want things to be very correct. My mom, she's actually a little part German, and she has to be very organized or she gets stressed out. And so that sort of thing comes from that German, or at least she says it does. But Germans in general always wanted to know the exact things. They want to be very precise. Even if we get into Hitler and the German Nazis, like one of the backbones of why they were very successful was they needed everything to be absolutely perfect. And when everything is absolutely perfect, then they were better than everybody in terms of fighting and in the army. But we'll get to World War II later on. I do talk a little bit about it at the end for fun because it's one of the most interesting time periods ever. But back to Dürer, and a German artist. So he's going to take part of his German traits, which is to be very precise and organized, and he's going to go to Italy, where beauty and the admiration of the classics, the myth of Greece and Rome are being admired. And he's going to combine those two. So he's going to be a German. And again, anything I write down on this, you probably want to write down as well into your notes. Okay. So he's going to take the best of Germany and he's going to take the best of Italy and put it together. And that's why he's worth talking about here. And that's what the Renaissance is going to start doing. All of it starts in Italy, yes, but as we get later and later, it's going to start combining some of the great things of the other countries, like the French and the German and the Polish, as we saw yesterday, Spanish, Portuguese, English. And then that's when the Renaissance really hits its full stride. And that's something to keep in mind, okay? He also is very, very famous for woodcuts, okay? Okay. Woodcuts. So woodcuts is basically art on a piece of wood, okay? And it's hard to do. You might see people trying to do this. They take their knife and they're chopping, take a big block of wood and then they're going to make something out of it. And you have to be very precise. Okay, so I'll put that up there. And, not too many people had done that in terms of making proportion and art on wood. So he was a master of that. And that's really what he's also really well known for, is his ability to work on wood. And those things are awesome because they do last the test of time a lot better than a painting. Some of the great Renaissance paintings are lost forever just because of trying to survive centuries. And then also they deteriorate in time. The thing we're seeing right now with Mona Lisa probably wasn't exactly what it was when he produced it for the, fresh. It's going to fade over time. But wood blocking doesn't do that. You might add some color to it, but the shapes are going to stay very similar. That's why statues also, they look just like they're fresh off of the marble block. But anyway, that's Albrecht Drew Herr. All right. We are moving on to another queen. We talked about a queen from Spain. That was awesome. And now we're going to talk about probably the most famous queen to ever have lived. Okay, there's really two famous queens. Both of them had the time that they ruled, it was named after them. Okay, so we have the Elizabethan area of England, and that's who we're talking about today. Let me go ahead and put her name here so you can see it. So this is Queen Elizabeth I of England, okay? You may have even heard of her. Okay, Queen Elizabeth. England also is going to have another queen called Queen Victoria. She's going to come a couple hundred years later, and they're going to name when the time that she rules the Victorian age. So you have the Elizabethan age and the Victorian age, named after these two great queens. And let's talk about her a little bit. So first of all, her story begins with one of the more famous people and tragedies of all time, and that's with King Henry VIII and his wife, Anne Boleyn. And you may have heard of her before. They actually made a movie called The Other Boleyn Girl about this. They've made a whole movie about it. And Natalie Portman's in it. Somebody else famous is in it too. I forgot who it was. But anyway, King Henry VIII, very much at this time, kings, they thought they were the best and they could do no wrong. So they would grow tired of their wives, or in some cases earlier on, if the wife wasn't producing a male child for the king, they would try to get another wife so that they could get a male heir to the king. Heir, when I say heir, right? Somebody who takes over as the next king. And usually, the men want to have boys to do that, but it doesn't really matter. But anyway, back to Elizabeth. So her father, King Henry VIII, and his second wife, he actually has two wives, hence the name The Other Boleyn Girl. Oops, let me spell it right. And I want to spell it out for you so you can see it. Okay, her name was Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn. All right, and he basically says Anne Boleyn cheats on somebody against King Henry. So King Henry sentences her to death, and guillotine, chops her head off. Okay, so he literally murders the mother of Queen of Elizabeth, right? So Elizabeth has her mom killed by her father. That's the essence of it. And of course, it's going to be, I mean, imagine that, having your mother killed by your father and getting away with it, right? Because he's the king and there's no problem. He claims something and then says, okay, we have to behead her, and it's fine. So what happens to Elizabeth, she is actually then in line to be the next monarch or ruler of England. And she goes away for a little bit, becomes very educated and very smart, away from the royalty. A lot of times, I think if you're raised within the royalty, you become spoiled, a little bit of a brat. Elizabeth, you know, she has her mother killed and then is sent off, kind of humbles her a little bit. And when she comes back, she becomes queen at 25 years old and is going to rule for over 45 years. All right. She's going to live a long time. She's going to take over at 25 and she's going to rule for 45 years. It's a long, long time. Now, as you might guess, she is going to be a very popular ruler. They named a whole age, a whole era after her. And it's probably coming from the fact that she was very humbled and had a very devastating childhood with her mother being decapitated and all, that she becomes a very fair and just ruler. She is open to new ideas. She doesn't think she knows everything. And they actually call her the blessed ruler of England because she's so understanding of the people. She wants to help them so much. And for many kings and queens and throughout history, this is not the case. They only care about themselves and the riches that they can have. But Queen Elizabeth really did care about her people, and she encourages art. She encourages literature. She's going to encourage William Shakespeare, who we're going to get to in a little bit. And she encourages the people. She is part of it. And she is also goes through a couple of wars, as you could imagine. 45 years, a long time. She goes through a few wars and wins them very well. She basically has a perfect ruling, as you would hope a queen would do. And she is celebrated now because of that. Despite the awful start to her life, she becomes one of the greatest queens of England, probably of all time, and probably one of the most famous people of all time, and especially king or queen. If we're talking about kings or queens of all time, Queen Elizabeth is one of the most famous, okay? So Queen Elizabeth, the blessed queen. All right, let's move to our next one, okay? And this is somebody you've probably heard of, and you will read as you get going, and that is Shakespeare, William Shakespeare. Okay, there are some people who claim William Shakespeare did not write the things that he wrote, that he stole them from other people, took credit for it. It doesn't, that for history's sake, it doesn't really matter, because what he did or whoever did it is what we're studying, and not so much who did it. So if he did it or if he didn't, that's beyond the point really for our class. Maybe in an English class you can debate that when it comes, but honestly, somebody wrote those words down, and those are the words that changed everything when it comes to literature, okay? So you've probably heard of some of the famous works of Shakespeare: Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, The Merchant of Venice. These are some very famous ones. You're actually going to read Romeo and Juliet when you get to 9th grade, and you'll read Macbeth in your senior year of high school. So that's something to look forward to. But what Shakespeare does that's so brilliant is he is able to rhyme his words and create a whole story. So we write poetry. It's maybe a couple of lines long, maybe a page long, but he's writing hundreds upon hundreds of pages with perfect rhyming structure and the iambic pentameter, which is beats per line. So every line that he has will have 10 syllables, and it has an on beat and an off beat. So it's like a heartbeat. So bop, 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 bop. That little beat or that cadence is called the iambic pentameter. And he created that or mastered it. I don't know if he created it, but he mastered it. and he created hundreds of pages of stories using that beat with a perfect rhyming structure, and then telling a wonderful story. For instance, Romeo and Juliet, a tragedy, two people desperately in love with each other that come from different communities. We can even still relate that today, right? In terms of race, right? People from different races falling in love can be very difficult. You also have different families and gangs and stuff to this day. In fact, that's what they were. They were two different families or gangs even, that Romeo was from one gang and Juliet was from the other. They fall in love, but they can't be together because the gangs hate each other and they fight a lot. And eventually they both end up dying because one thinks the other's dead. They commit suicide. And then once that other person wakes up, sees that that person died, they commit suicide. So it's a huge tragedy. But there are also, he also mastered another type of genre, and that's the comedy genre. You probably don't think of Shakespeare as funny, but during his time, what he would do is create stories that had a happy ending. So the happily ever after, your Disney stories, where every time it's a happily ever after and everybody lived peacefully and happy forever, and it was great. That's all from Shakespeare. So sometimes stories had a happy ending, sometimes they didn't have an ending, they didn't have a conclusion. Shakespeare comes up with this idea that there's a comedy and literature should make you feel good and that the good guy can win. And so that's from Shakespeare. So he is really influential on literature, especially to this day. I mean, we still have tragedies. I mean, look at any of the modern movies. There's sad stories that we watch. That we have comedies in terms of a happy ending, not so much like laughing out loud, but make you feel good type of stories. That's going to be what Shakespeare mastered in. And you know what else he did, to be honest, is he created a kind of a culture of arts that people went to and became social with. So his plays became so popular that people would go and see them, almost like a movie theater. And remember, people were only gathering for so many years, going to church and that was it. But Shakespeare brought people together to watch his plays and to watch his stories, and they would come together and it would be a social thing. So, you know, concerts and movie theaters today, we all can trace that back really to Shakespeare and his beautiful literature that got people to go. And then, people like, we could charge people to come see Shakespeare. Oh, wait, we can make this. And so it all comes back to Shakespeare. So that's why he's so popular. And then once you do get your language skills a little bit higher in high school and understand some of the words that he uses, the stories are brilliant and very, very beautiful. It took me a while to appreciate Shakespeare. In fact, it took me out of college. I always detested, I hated reading Shakespeare because it was so hard and difficult. But eventually I got to the point where I was like, wait a minute, this guy or whoever wrote this is unbelievably brilliant. And so you'll get to that point eventually. And that's why Shakespeare has stood the test of time. All right, we're on to our last two. Even our last one we've talked about quite a bit. And this next one is a span. Oh, by the way, Shakespeare is English. So English. So we've had today German, we've had English, and then English again. And then now we're going back to Spain with another writer. His name is Cervantes. Cervantes. Probably with a lisp to Cervantes. He is a Spanish writer. Miguel Cervantes is his name, by the way. And he's going to write a very famous book that many people still read to this day, much like Romeo and Juliet. Sorry, I hit my toe. Don Quixote, okay? Don Quixote. Now, this is the guy that really invents the comedy in terms of laughter, making you smile. So comedy in terms of Shakespeare is about the happy, good feeling type of story. Cervantes establishes this genre of comedy, like laugh out loud stuff. And he creates a whole new genre that had never really existed at the time that you guys probably love. And it's called satire. Okay, so satire is something that is a sharp attack to provide humor on something. So the best examples that I like to give are Scary Movie. the series Scary Movie. I don't know if those, it might be a little bit dated, but they made fun of the horror genre, right? The predictability, the stupidness of the main characters, the ridiculousness of the villain or whatever. The satire was Scary Movie, and it made fun of all of those things by kind of doing the same things in a ridiculous way. You also see satires all over the time, even the like sarcastic things. So several movies come out. Oh my gosh, what's the guy's name that did? He did. I forgot the name of it. How did I forget the name of it? The guy that. Oh, I gotta look it up. Hang on. Again, I'm probably dating myself a little bit here. It's Sacha Baron Cohen. He did, what did he do? Oh my gosh. Borat. Remember Borat? I don't know. It's 2006. Some of you, it's a long time ago. But Borat is about, it's a satire. Again, it's a comedy. Talladega Nights. Those movies, that are making fun of a particular thing, but by doing the thing. So like in Talladega Nights with Will Ferrell, right? He's a race car driver, and it's making fun of that community of race cars, but it's also kind of honoring them as well. So that's the satire genre, and it had not existed until Cervantes comes and basically creates that with his novel, Don Quixote. So that's Cervantes. All right. He becomes very, very popular as well during his time. You're starting to see some celebrities exist, right? So if we look back at some of the famous celebrities, right, we're getting into one with Da Vinci, but Michelangelo, he's a celebrity. Cervantes, Shakespeare, Copernicus. Who else have we talked about? Visalia. He's not really a celebrity, right? We know celebrities today, and these are starting to pop up because the only celebrities we had prior to the Renaissance, unless we go back all the way to ancient Greece and Rome, are popes and kings and maybe generals. That's it. Those are the famous people of the time. If you had something to do with religion, you had something to do with your country, or you fought. Like those are the celebrities. You didn't have people in the arts. There weren't famous artists. There weren't famous literature or authors. There weren't anybody famous until we go back to Greece and Rome. And then you have some famous people like Homer and Plato and Aristotle. Those types of guys were pretty famous during their time. But now, so the idea of a famous person that doesn't have to be in the government or doesn't have to be fighting or doesn't have to be in the religion, they can still be famous. And so that's another thing to remember when we come to this. So yeah, the last person in our chapter is Da Vinci. We've talked about Da Vinci quite a bit. We did a whole lesson, a project on Da Vinci, so I don't think I need to spend too much time. But yeah, he was an Italian that drew the Mona Lisa. He drew the Last Supper. He also was a scientist and inventor. So you know all of that, hopefully. But if you need to, you can read chapter 30 for a little bit of review. All right. So just to recap, we have the Renaissance. It starts in Italy. People in Italy become famous and are doing magnificent things like Michelangelo, like Da Vinci. But it doesn't stay there. It's going to spread to these other countries and influence the things that are happening. For instance, in Spain with exploration, we have English monarch of Queen Elizabeth and literature with William Shakespeare. We have Copernicus in Poland doing science. So all of the ideas that start in Italy are obviously going to expand to the rest of Europe. And then eventually Europe's going to expand to the rest of the world, where the New World, which is North America, South America, the Aztecs, Mayans, all those guys, we're going to get to them. Those guys are going to be influenced. The European countries are going to become so advanced and far ahead of the rest of the world. They're going to start to take over through colonization of countries in Africa, of countries in China, countries in Asia. I should say not just China, but all of Asia, India, Australia, even in North America. They're going to start colonizing, and then the world's going to be what we call the Western idea, the Western thought, Western civilization. And really, it does all start in Italy. So that's the main thing to remember with this chapter. And then you need to know something about each of those people. So you can click on that link again. Those people are Michelangelo, he's the artist, Titian, the Italian painter, Drew Hare, which is another German artist with the woodworking, Copernicus was the scientist, Vesalius was the doctor, the medical guy with the anatomy, Isabella, the Queen of Spain, really for championing exploration, Queen Elizabeth I, the Blessed Monarch of England, William Shakespeare, the English playwright, Miguel Cervantes, the Spanish writer who creates the idea of satire, and Leonardo da Vinci, scientist, artist, and inventor. Okay, so there you go. Chapter 30 hopefully wasn't too long for you today, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the video there, and that's it. So we're almost done with our Renaissance. We're getting through it, and I think we go to chapter 31. Let me double check and make sure what we'll be doing for chapter 31 in our book. Chapter 31. Drink water here. Or are we done with chapter 31? We might be done. No, we can't be done. Might be getting to the end. I gotta do a little bit of review on chapter 31 if there what we'll be doing in there, but we're getting towards the end of the Renaissance, which is awesome. So yeah, that's gonna do it for today. Rewatch the video if you need and get all those projects in, those 2 big 50-point projects. Got to get those in. Okay, guys, I'm out. I'll see you tomorrow.